From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. It's Friday, and that means a check of the activity taking place in the grain market with K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien. This week he covers some of the potential drivers for the 2022 corn market. Then Eric visits with K-State environmental quality agronomist Peter Tomlinson about employing livestock waste as an alternate crop nutrient source in light of astronomically high commercial fertilizer costs. This time he cites K-State research on the variability in nutrient content among the various types of livestock manure, and within a given lot for manure from a livestock source. And K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond has this week's agricultural weather outlook. It's all just ahead on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. This is Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. Up first today, K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien with a look at this week's activity taking place in the grain markets. Dan, first maybe starting off by just looking at the futures markets, it looks like there was some activity on the soybean markets.
Yes, when you look at yesterday's trade, we closed the March contract, March 2022, at $14.25 cents, up 34.5 cents. New crop November up 15 3/4 to $13.20. And a lot of what's happening on the soybean market has to do with worries about spillover impacts from a potential Russia and Ukrainian conflict. And again, worries about what sunflower oil exports or shipments from that area might be affected. And also, I think not so much worries that there wouldn't be access at all to supplies, but more worries about how international response would be to such an aggression that would occur. And there's the potential that exports could get cut off, et cetera. That's affecting both the soybean complex and especially the wheat complex. Now, wheat was down yesterday. The March contract for electronic hard red winter wheat was down 3.5 cents, down to $7.96.5. With July, the new crop contract at 801.5. I think the thing that just stands out is, my gracious, what prices these are, you know. Again, with soybeans, the first 4 months on the futures over $14 for prices, and wheat either at or just below $8. It's just an amazing situation. When you look at the corn market also, March closed up about 0.5 cent. Then the other contracts, the March 2022 corn contract at $6.11, again up 0.5 cent. Other contracts which had been up for the week generally so far in the week through Thursday were down just slightly with the May contract 6.10 3/4, the December contract 5.62 1/4. Still, these are also historically high prices and indicative of general worries that are occurring in the markets. We had been watching up until this week dry weather conditions in South America have an impact on soybeans and to some degree on corn. Now there are some forecasts for some moisture to come in down there, but it doesn't seem like the moisture, at least so far, has alleviated the dry conditions. So I think just really heady times in the grain markets, leaving people on the selling side wondering where prices might go if they have any old crop grain left. And for new crop bids, which would have a lot to do with forward pricing for corn and soybeans for the next 6, 8, 9 months, those holding up really well. Wheat prices, again, in any new crop production we would be aiming at the July 2022 contract, and again, that's over $8. So just quite the times right now in the Kansas agricultural grains complex.
You mentioned the corn markets, and one of the things that you've been discussing on the Winning the Game grain marketing workshops this past week, Southeast Kansas this week, Wichita and Newton as well. So you are getting out and about, and what you're really looking at are some of the drivers for the 2022 corn markets?
Yes. In an effort to help people develop effective pre-harvest marketing plans for 2022, in this case for corn, but also we have some workshops for soybeans and grain sorghum and can do them for wheat also. Still, the number one factor is probably the U.S. economy. A relatively strong U.S. GDP is in the offing, but there are fears of inflation that could cause a recession and actually even more inflation. Second factor, of course, is the resolution, the resolving of the dry conditions that have existed so far in Argentina and southern Brazil, and also in some of those other countries, other important countries, Paraguay in particular. It's generally thought to be hurtful to soybean production, unsure yet for corn, for first crop corn as it finishes up, but also second crop corn still to come. And then third, just really the battle for U.S. corn acres. The market narrative so far has been that U.S. corn acres probably would be down 2 to 3 million acres this year, and that those would go to soybeans. However, this battle we've had to gain access to nitrogen fertilizer, which is mainly an input for the feed grains for corn, sorghum, and barley, etc., that whole price action is indicative of farmers still trying to get corn in if they can. So really that the dates that we'll be wrestling with these issues in the market will come at the end of March when we have the prospective plantings report, and at the end of June as we have the acreage report, and just lots and lots of opportunity for volatility. Strong U.S. corn usage so far in the current marketing year through basically the end of August. Really, we have been having pretty high ethanol plant profitability, pretty strong corn usage, but we're seeing a little bit of that profitability wane as corn prices are remaining high, but still pretty strong ethanol usage so far this year. Exports about 2.425 billion bushels. And again, what comes out of the Black Sea region, geopolitical conflict could have a big impact on U.S. corn exports, particularly given that Ukraine is one of the top four, basically either the third or fourth highest world corn exporters. So if there are problems there logistically, they can't get corn out to either China or other countries of the world, that ends up and probably increases U.S. corn exports. And feed use has been holding up pretty well, too, at about 5.65 billion bushels, and that would be comparable to where we've been the last couple of years. Tighter stocks to use. The latest USDA projection for the old crop year is about 1.54 billion bushels, 10.4% stocks to use. Again, ending stocks at 1.54. And, you just ask yourself, what's the impact of a plus or minus 250 million change in that? Well, it just really shows how we're on the knife's edge, the razor's edge, with regard to where the corn market could go. If we end up being short about 250,000 bushels for any set of production, or again lower production, higher use levels, then you take ending stocks down to about 9% stocks to use, again below 10, and prices just remaining all that much stronger than they have been. And of course, a little more bearish response if we go the other way. I would also say, when you look at the U.S. corn price outlook for the coming year, one factor to not ignore is, of course, the acreage issue, but also the impact of how record high fertilizer prices may lead to a reduction in the amount of nitrogen fertilizer applied per acre, probably a foregone conclusion. And if that happens, what does that do to U.S. corn yields? It potentially takes us down to, say, 14.5, 14.5, 14.3 billion bushels of corn, and that would have a big impact on the bottom line. So, and I guess to finish up on that whole train of thought, we look at other market factors. We have moderate U.S. grain sorghum exports, kind of a blocky pace, kind of a paced China demand. Inflation and crop production inputs certainly be a big issue, is a big issue so far. And again, that key question just restated, if we apply less fertilizer to crop acres, particularly corn this year, then will it impact final 2022 production? It seems destined to do that. Other broad market factors, potential for geopolitical problems in the Black Sea and Asia-Pacific regions, as we've talked about. And we have elections coming up this fall, and the potential for U.S. government actions to address certain maladies in the U.S. economy. Do we see price controls? Do we see Fed policies that seek to hold back inflation with higher interest rates? All these things could come in and affect not just financial markets, but also our U.S. ag commodity markets that depend on them. So, Jeff, just lots and lots and lots of things up in the air right now. And out of those workshops that we had, as we talked with people about marketing plans to make for this coming year, it seems to be good to not underestimate the type of strength that we see, particularly in corn markets, as we go on into 2022. So
there's also then a lot of key factors to be watching in maybe April, May, June, and July.
Yes, and I guess I would say that when you look at the seasonality of prices in Kansas, and in the United States, that if anything, we're seeing more an increased seasonality with stronger prices coming into the spring and early summer than we have in the past. Again, key corn factors to watch in April. If we'll be watching for Brazil remaining either dry or not, and the impact on the second crop corn, how the U.S. and China trade status and/or export pace holds up. Of course, we'll be watching for U.S. planted acres of corn versus soybeans. And it's often kind of forgotten, but we'll be watching closely domestic corn use issues. Again, does anything happen in the U.S. economy that slows down consumer traveling? Is that COVID-19? Is that some type of other policy issue meant to control inflation, or who knows what that could be? If something slows down summer driving, then that affects the ethanol industry negatively, and then that would affect the corn market. Livestock profitability, feed use, that's all in play too. And, of course, exports are the wild card, and we'll be watching South American crop production to find out how much competition we have and really where our exports might go as we head off into the future.
We're always hoping to hear something optimistic. Are you sharing some optimism you feel along the way?
I think so. The optimism is that it's hard to foresee in the normal course of agricultural trends a lot of things that would take prices lower. And really a lot of our threats have to do with outside things. Again, geopolitical conflicts that could have one impact either up or down on the other. Basically, it would cause volatility. And the possibility with an election coming up of U.S. government policies that would be meant to do such things as control inflation and or deal with other maladies in the economy. And if those things come about, they can have intended and or unintended consequences on ag markets for grains, and we'll be watchful to see what all goes on.
You'll have more workshops coming up, and they can find all of that information as well as all of your marketing information at agmanager.info?
Yes, we have a workshop coming up in Solomon, right near Salina and Abilene on Monday the 24th. We'll be focusing on soybeans in that workshop. Anybody that has an interest is surely welcome to come.
That's K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien with his weekly update on grain market activity. And again, for more information, go to agmanager.info. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Agriculture Today continues now, and we're going to pick back up on a topic that we spoke about with our guest here recently, and that is the utilization of livestock waste, or to be more direct, livestock manure, as a nutrient source for crop production, especially in the wake of the spike, to say the least, in commercial fertilizer prices. Peter Tomlinson is here once again, environmental quality agronomist with K-State Research and Extension. Peter, before we get into the particulars of the topic at hand here, are you still receiving inquiries from producers about utilizing livestock waste as an alternate to commercial fertilizers, given the state of the market?
Yes. We continue to get questions about how manure may fit into Operation Soil Fertility Program. Bill, this is driven by our current high NP and K prices, and manure is a good option if it's available in your locale. At soil fertility schools, I actually talk about manure in your soil fertility program. And
it's more practical than some producers might think at first blush, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, it does take a bit of a change in mindset. Manure is... It's what comes out of the animal that they don't need in their dietary ration, and so it's not balanced. It's not quite as simple as calling the co-op and ordering the blend of NP and K that you want. You've got to work with what's been given to you, and then supplement that with additional commercial nutrients.
And what you wanted to pass along today, Peter, was being cognizant as a producer using this material as a nutrient source of the nutrient level variability within the different sources. And that can be significant, you say?
Yes, it can. So I've spent some time recently looking back through the animal waste study that Alan Schlegel conducted at Tribune from about 1999 through 2008. So we've got a 10-year data set there. And that study utilized both cattle feedlot manure as well as swine effluent. And as I've been looking at this data set, one of the things that's important to recognize is the nutrient composition, or as I think about it, the nutrient density is definitely different based on where that manure is coming from. So poultry litter is going to have a higher nitrogen and phosphorus concentration per ton of manure than, say, beef feedlot or swine effluent.
And is there a specific reason for that, or it's just the nature of the difference of the species?
It partly has to do with the ration, but it also has to do with how the animals are housed. So in a broiler litter production, you're raising multiple flocks of birds on the same bedding that is, probably cleaned out annually or maybe even only every 2 years. So you've got more manure collection there. Whereas, with feedlot manure, you certainly have the manure deposition, but you also have precipitation events. And so you're moving some of that nutrient out of the manure, the solid manure, and into the lagoon. So if you're getting beef feedlot manure, it's just doesn't have as many nutrients still there. We may have had ammonia volatilization in the pens. And so analyzing that manure is really important. Just some numbers to share with the group. Looking at the feedlot manure at the study at Tribune, we averaged around 24 pounds of organic nitrogen per ton. So we'd anticipate about 25% of that would be available to the crop producer in the first year. And that had a range of 16 to 30.
Wow.
So quite a spread. And this highlights the importance of once that manure is delivered to your operation, it's in your best interest if whoever has provided you with that manure that you've purchased it from hasn't provided a recent analysis to take some samples, send them in for analysis, and then recalculate your application based on that. If the sequence just doesn't allow for analysis and calculating your application rates, collect samples as that manure is being applied and analyze it, and then do the back calculation to figure out if maybe you're long on phosphorus, maybe you're short on phosphorus, maybe you're long on nitrogen or short on nitrogen. But, this helps to make sure that you're not shorting your crop on the nutrients that it needs. The other challenge, and we've talked about this before, is, we've got an organic component that has to be broken down on both phosphorus and nitrogen. That's why, particularly on the nitrogen side, we're only going to count 25% of that as being available in the first year to the crop, because we know that the decomposition process takes time. All that being said, if we manage our manure applications based on the phosphorus needs of the crop, we can also mitigate some of that nitrogen availability risk, because we're going to need to supplement with additional nitrogen, commercial nitrogen, and that also helps to manage the risk of making sure that we've got nitrogen available for the crop when it needs it.
But once more, these variations between sources are not the outlier. They're very common, so
that
has to be accounted for.
Yes, variation, just based on the rations or the age group of animals that's being raised, there can be variability in load to load. There can be, maybe you're getting it all from the same feedlot, but different satellite locations of that same feedlot. And maybe one's feeding a heavier corn silage ration while another one's feeding, a heavier flaked corn ration. So, what the animals eat contributes to what comes out on the back end.
Right. Well, if one's supplier isn't providing that analysis upon delivery, one can go ahead, as you say, Peter, and have that analysis done post-delivery. The sampling procedure here, for those not familiar with this aspect?
Yeah. What I have found is easiest is when those truckloads are coming into your operation, have a scoop shovel and periodically as that truck is unloading, grab a shovel full, put it in a clean 5-gallon bucket, mix it around so that you're getting a good composite sample of that manure that's being delivered, and pull a bag full. And the K-State Soil Testing Lab does not do manure analysis, but we've got a number of good service providers in the state that will do manure analysis. So some of the key things to make sure that you're getting in your manure analysis, certainly we're going to want to know the organic nitrogen, the inorganic nitrogen, as well as I think it's, you're going to want to get phosphorus. Manures are a great source for sulfur and micronutrients. So, if the lab has the capability to test beyond NP and K, that can give you an idea of what other micronutrients may be coming from that manure, and that can factor into your overall fertility plan. And that brings up a good point. If you're thinking about bringing manure into your fertility program, use that manure to meet your phosphorus needs. Okay. It's a good source of phosphorus, and if we manage it based on phosphorus, we reduce the risk of challenges around water quality and phosphorus runoff. When we think about trying to meet all of our fertility needs with manure, if we calculate based on nitrogen, we're going to add phosphorus in excess. Now, in the short term, that may not be an issue, but if manure is used long term, it really does present a water quality challenge. And from the economic standpoint, in my look at it, it just doesn't make sense. Let's utilize it to meet our phosphorus need and then supplement with additional nitrogen. So I think you're ahead of the game in terms of bringing those critical nutrients into your crop production system.
Well, the idea here in doing this in the first place is to economize on your nutrient management and the availability to your crop. But you need to be as efficient as possible with this approach, just as you would with a commercial fertilizer product. So understanding the variability in content of the various products, and if you're not sure, having that measured for an accurate reading on that is highly important here. Peter, thanks for passing along the numbers from K-State research into this topic and on generally using manure as a crop nutrient source. Appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me to talk today.
He is Peter Tomlinson, environmental quality agronomist with K-State Research and Extension. You're listening to Agriculture Today. We'll stand aside one more time now. When we come back, Jeff once more will be at the helm as he'll be visiting with K-State's Chip Redmond about the latest outlook on Kansas agricultural weather. Next for you here on the K-State Radio Network. Stay with us.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. Well, as usual, we wrap up the week with a check on Kansas agricultural weather. Here to provide that update is K-State Research and Extension meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip, it looks like the dryness continues, and I'm assuming that means that the drought monitor is not improving.
Yeah, another week of, thankfully, status quo conditions for most of the state. However, that isn't necessarily a good thing. That means no improvements. We've seen continued dry conditions with some places in the state. Central Kansas is approaching 80 days without a tenth of an inch of rain. Southwest Kansas and parts of Northwest are over 100 days. So we're talking a long time without substantial moisture. And those deficits continue to accumulate. Now, granted, we are in the driest time of the year. So our average precipitation for a week period is anywhere from about a tenth of an inch at best in the west to about 0.3 to 0.4 of an inch in the far southeast. So we really accumulate slower the deficits at this time of year. So therefore, status quo of the drought monitor, a little bit of degradation in the far southeast, but continued dryness. And if we continue this, we can expect further degradation in the coming weeks.
Is there any chance that we could see some of that Gulf moisture that we kind of depend on this time of the year?
Yeah, Gulf moisture is not very likely this time of year. We're in kind of northwest flow, with northwest winds in the upper levels of the atmosphere, and that keeps cold fronts coming through here about every couple of days, and that pushes all that Gulf moisture and shunts it off to the east, and so we do not get any benefit of Gulf moisture, and unfortunately it looks like that's not going to change anytime soon.
I think you're kind of alluding to the fact that we're seeing some of those fairly wide temperature swings. It seems like every 2 or 3 days we have a different weather outlook. Is that normal this time of year?
Yeah, the temperature swings are fairly typical. It just means we're in an active weather pattern. Thankfully, the swings of cooler air have kept the big snowstorms off to the east and the really cold air is off to our east. And we're warmer to the west of us. So it kind of puts us in that battleground between the cold and the warm. And so we get those fluctuations. Ahead of the cold front, we'll get a day or two of warm conditions. And then once that front comes through, we'll get cooler. Now, granted, we've had a little bit of a pattern shift here. So our temperature swings are not going to be as aggressive. And we're going to see overall average temperatures to actually slightly below average to finish out the month.
And as we head towards February, we start to think that maybe we'll see that slow increase in high temperatures?
Yeah, I believe this time of year, here in the late January, it's the coldest time of the year for Kansas. And then the average temperatures start climbing in February. Not substantially, but we gain quite a few degrees throughout the month. The new monthly outlooks just came out on Thursday, the 20th. And unfortunately for February, it looks like that gradual warming is going to trend towards above normal temperatures as well. And so we're going to see warmer temperatures. We might start off cool in February. We might even have a cold spell in the middle of the month, but overall, we're expecting February average warmer than normal.
We've also had a lot of wind. I think maybe for the first time we had maybe what some people might consider an actual wind chill. But what kind of an impact does all of that wind have, especially on dry soil?
Yeah, we've had some breezy conditions. We just had 60-mile-an-hour winds again in western Kansas last week and moved a lot of dirt, unfortunately. You know, the wind doesn't help our cause. It dries out that soil even further, and where we did have the benefits of some of that light snow over the last few weeks with a little bit of moisture in the topsoil, we're going to slowly erode that away if we get breezy conditions. Right now, not looking at anything overly significant, nothing like December's epic storm, but that doesn't help us recharge moisture in the soils, and it fights against us, especially with warmer than normal temperatures. Granted, if we are cooler than normal for the next few weeks, our ground stays frozen, and that definitely helps hold some of that moisture in there during these wind events.
Well, we will look forward to that weather changing and getting a little bit warmer as the days move on. And as always, Chip, we thank you for the update.
Yep, no problem. Thank you.
That's K-State Research and Extension meteorologist Chip Redmond with a look at Kansas agricultural weather. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman, wishing you a good weekend and inviting you to join us again on Monday for more Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.